He lured children into his castles, and they were never seen again. Servants whisper of dungeons lit by candles, where boys were stripped, humiliated, and slaughtered for his pleasure. Parents wept as their sons vanished into noble halls, believing they had found opportunity, only to discover bones in rivers, ashes in fields, and silence at their hearths. In court, the truth spilled out like blood. Witnesses described rituals of fire and knives, of children murdered in the name of demons and desire. Their testimonies stunned France, exposing the monster behind the mask of a knight. This man was no common killer. He was Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France, war hero, and companion of Joan of Arc. Once a symbol of glory, he became a name synonymous with horror. And when justice came, it was as grotesque as his crimes. Flames rose, ropes tightened, and the crowd watched as the butcher of children was consumed. Yet even in death, his legacy twisted into legend, birthing tales that still haunt us today. This is the true story of Gilles de Rais, the nobleman who lured children into his castles and butchered them. A story so dark it blurs the line between history and nightmare. Before we peel back the layers of this nightmare, hit subscribe to Histoeureka. Like, share, and comment your country below. These forgotten horrors get buried, and together we'll drag them back into the light. France, in the early 1400s, was a nation bleeding from the 100 Years' War. Fields lay scorched, peasants starved, and villages bore scars of endless raids. It was in this fractured kingdom that Gilles de Rais was born into privilege. The Laval family name carried immense weight. Land, castles, and gold placed Gilles among the wealthiest nobles of Brittany. Yet this fortune came with a curse. He lost both parents young, leaving greedy guardians to fight over his inheritance. Raised amid lawsuits and political maneuvers, Gilles learned early that family bonds meant little compared to land and power. It hardened him, molding a boy into a youth who understood betrayal as routine. By adolescence, Gilles was groomed for war. He excelled in swordsmanship, horsemanship, and strategy. Unlike many nobles who indulged in leisure, Gilles showed a ferocity that set him apart on the battlefield. That ferocity found its stage during France's darkest hour. The English advanced, the crown tottered, and into this despair rode a peasant girl claiming divine visions. Joan of Arc. Gilles would soon stand at her side. The siege of Orléans became legend. Joan rode in white armor, a banner blazing before stunned soldiers. Gilles, commanding troops at her flank, turned her divine inspiration into brutal military victories. Together, they lifted French morale. Victories followed: Jargeau, Meung, Beaugency, Patay. Gilles' courage earned him the rank of Marshal of France, one of the highest honors in the kingdom. Chronicles praised his bravery, noting his tactical brilliance and unwavering loyalty to Joan. To peasants, he was a savior. To nobles, a rising star. Gilles de Rais seemed the very image of chivalry. Yet shadows crept in. While Joan fought for God and country, Gilles reveled in spectacle. He spent fortunes on tournaments, feasts, and pageants that dwarfed even royal celebrations. Extravagance became his obsession. His estates bled money. He poured gold into theatrical productions so grand that entire villages became performers. One play consumed enough wealth to ruin a minor lord, and Gilles staged such feasts regularly. When Joan was captured and burned in 1431, Gilles' glory crumbled. His purpose evaporated. The hero who had basked in her divine light now drifted into decadence and despair. Without war, he turned inward, filling the void with indulgence. His castles overflowed with actors, musicians, and servants. His wealth melted into excess, his halls becoming stages of hollow grandeur, but extravagance alone could not sate him. His craving for control deepened. As his fortunes collapsed, Gilles sought forbidden paths, alchemy, occultism, and whispers of summoning demons. His soul teetered at the edge of ruin. The Marshal of France, once the banner of glory, was now a lord sinking into shadows. His castles, symbols of power, would soon become prisons of horror. And behind their stone walls, the first children began to vanish. Gilles de Rais returned from war to halls heavy with silence. Victory had given him honor, but peace demanded restraint. For a man addicted to spectacle, restraint was unbearable. He turned his castles into theaters of excess. Gold poured like wine. He financed pageants so extravagant that nobles gasped in awe. Whole villages were hired to play roles, children dressed in silks, and choirs filled chapels with music that seemed eternal. But money drains faster than applause. By the mid-1430s, his fortune crumbled. To fund his habits, he sold lands, mortgaged estates, and borrowed heavily. Kin and creditors protested, yet Gilles only demanded more feasts, more grandeur, as though splendor alone could hold back ruin. Amid financial collapse, his obsessions darkened. He surrounded himself with alchemists, astrologers, and necromancers who promised miracles, gold conjured from stone, demons bent to his will, power unshaken by decay. Desperation made him reckless. At Tiffauges and Machecoul, secret rituals began. Witnesses later described books inked with occult symbols, sacrifices whispered over flames, and invocations muttered to summon spirits. Gilles believed demons could refill his coffers, if paid in blood. Soon, whispers of missing children spread. At first, they were beggars lured with bread or coins. Then peasants' sons promised work as pages or choir boys. Families rejoiced when their children were summoned to serve a noble house. But joy turned to horror. Those children never returned. Instead, silence fell where laughter once lived. Rivers carried fragments, woods concealed bones, and rumors clung to villages like smoke after fire. Servants inside the castles began to murmur. Some claimed to hear screams muffled by stone at night. Others whispered of torches burning too late, of boys taken to chambers and never seen again. When questioned, Gilles laughed it off, cloaking cruelty in charm. He was still Marshal of France, a companion of Joan of Arc. Who would dare accuse a hero of unspeakable crimes? His reputation shielded him like iron. Yet the stories multiplied. A boy was seen entering the castle clutching a fine gift, only for the gift to be found abandoned in the mud by morning. A girl vanished, her charred remains later discovered near the moat. By 1437, entire villages feared the name of Gilles de Rais. Parents warned children not to stray near his estates. Still, hunger and poverty drove the desperate to his gates. And still, children disappeared. The Marshal's castles had become mausoleums. Their halls, once filled with music, now drank the cries of the innocent. Behind the walls, he fed his hunger for domination in rituals of fire, flesh, and silence. Gilles de Rais was no longer the hero of Orléans. He had become something else, a tyrant hidden in candlelight, his cruelty masked by velvet and gold. The world outside suspected, but fear sealed lips and power silenced tongues. For now, his crimes remained shadows, but soon arrogance and rage would drag them into the light, and when they did, the nobleman's mask would shatter, exposing the butcher who lived behind the walls. By 1440, whispers had grown into a roar. Too many children had vanished, too many families grieved in silence. Gilles' arrogance finally cracked his shield when he kidnapped a cleric during a land dispute. The church could no longer ignore him. Accusations flooded in. Peasants spoke of sons who never returned. Mothers wept over bones dredged from rivers. Servants, once silent, told of chambers lit by candles where boys were abused, tortured, and killed in rituals too grotesque to name. Gilles was arrested at Machecoul. The Marshal of France, who once rode beside Joan of Arc, was paraded through streets in chains. Crowds gathered in disbelief. How could a hero become a butcher of children? The trial in Nantes was a theater of horror. Nobles, clergy, and peasants filled the hall. Testimonies spilled like blood, each more shocking than the last. The crimes were no longer whispers. They became undeniable truth. One servant described how children were lured with promises of service, dressed in fine clothes, then stripped and humiliated before being killed. Another recounted Gilles laughing as victims screamed, finding delight in their suffering. Parents testified through tears. One mother told of her son, taken to serve the marshal, only for his charred remains to be found in ashes near the castle. Another father spoke of a daughter who vanished, never seen again. Even accomplices confessed. Alchemists and servants admitted to helping procure victims, describing rituals where children were slain before altars, their blood spilled in grotesque invocations. Each word turned the courtroom colder. Estimates of the dead varied wildly. Some said dozens, others claimed hundreds. No number could capture the scale of his crimes, for too many bodies were burned, scattered, or lost forever. At first, Gilles denied everything, raging against the court. But as testimonies mounted, his bravado collapsed. He broke down, weeping, confessing in chilling detail to murders that froze even hardened inquisitors. He admitted strangling children, stabbing them, burning their bodies to ash. He confessed to finding perverse beauty in their deaths, to being consumed by compulsions he could not resist. His words horrified all who heard them. The hero who once carried banners for France was revealed as its greatest monster. No title, no wealth, no prayer could save him. The court condemned Gilles de Rais to die by hanging and burning. On October 26, 1440, thousands filled the square in Nantes. Children sat on shoulders, peasants pressed forward, nobles looked on in silence. The man who had terrorized families was now a spectacle of justice. Dressed in penitent robes, Gilles was led to the gallows. Some say he wept, begging forgiveness. Others claim he held his head high and defiant to the last. Priests prayed as ropes tightened around his neck. Below, pyres of wood waited. Flames rose, licking his body, devouring the man who once commanded armies. The stench of burning flesh filled the air. Mothers in the crowd wept, not for him, but for the children who never returned. Some chronicles say his body was cut down early, returned to family for burial. Others insist the flames reduced him to ash, scattered like those of his countless victims. Either way, his life ended in fire and rope. The crowd left haunted. Could justice ever match such horror? Could one man's death balance the scales for so many innocent lives? Nantes was silent that night, heavy with the weight of evil unveiled. But the story did not end there. For out of Gilles' crimes would rise a legend, a fairy tale that cloaked truth in fiction. The tale of Bluebeard, the nobleman with forbidden chambers, whose story echoes his atrocities. If this story grips you, don't forget to subscribe to Histoeureka. Hit like, share it with someone who loves history, and tell us your country in the comments. We've got more untold horrors of the past waiting for you. The flames that consumed Gilles de Rais did not erase him. Instead, they carved his name into France's memory. His castles crumbled, but his crimes lingered, whispered in sermons, folklore, and fear. For the church, his downfall was a warning. Priests thundered from pulpits that sin leads to ruin, that even the highest nobles cannot escape God's justice. Gilles' story became less history than parable, retold to terrify the faithful. For peasants, it was grim vindication. Their whispers of missing children had been true. Their grief had not been madness. Yet the recognition came too late. Justice felt hollow when so many little graves remained unmarked. The nobility recoiled. If a Marshal of France could be unmasked as a monster, what did that say about the world of lords and castles? Reputation could no longer silence suspicion. Gilles became proof that privilege can rot from within. Historians painted him as a cautionary tale, the hero who became a predator. Psychologists centuries later would wonder if trauma, orphaned young, thrust into war, and stripped of purpose after Joan's death, warped him into a sadist. Occultists, however, spun another tale. Some whispered that Gilles was not guilty of hundreds of murders, but was destroyed for dabbling too deeply in forbidden knowledge. To them, his trial was less about children, more about fear of heresy. But the testimonies stand: servants, parents, accomplices. Too many voices, too much evidence. Even stripped of exaggeration, the truth remains unbearable. Innocence was slaughtered, and the man who once fought beside Joan of Arc was its butcher. His crimes bled into legend. The tale of Bluebeard, the nobleman with forbidden chambers where death awaited, bears his shadow. Fairy tale softened horror into story, but its roots are buried in his blood-stained halls. And yet, perhaps the most chilling part of Gilles' legacy is not the bodies, but the silence. For years, nobles, bishops, and kings looked away. The cost of their silence was paid in children's lives. The deadly cost of defiance was not just Gilles' rebellion against God. It was society's refusal to face what happened behind stone walls until it was far too late. That silence made them accomplices. Today, his name still unsettles, not just because of what he did, but because he reminds us that evil can wear velvet robes, carry banners of glory, and be celebrated as a hero until masks fall away. If this story left you shaken, remember, history is not just the past, it's a mirror. Subscribe to Histoeureka, share this video so others know these truths, and tell us where you're watching from. Together, we give voice to the silenced. Gilles de Rais may have burned to ash in Nantes, but his shadow never left. It lingers in every legend of a nobleman hiding horror behind stone walls. He showed us that the darkest monsters often wear the brightest armor. And if you thought his cruelty was unbearable, wait until you hear of the rulers who turned entire empires into torture chambers, a queen who fed her enemies to snakes, a king who made executions into theater. History is filled with nightmares. And next, we'll open the doors to one so grotesque, it makes Gilles de Rais look almost merciful.